Okay friends, one of the first things you want to do is safely raise and support the front of your vehicle so the suspension's hanging and the wheel's off the ground. After that, if you have a hubcap, go ahead and remove that now. Once you have the hubcap out of the way, continue on to your 4 21mm lug nuts and then remove your wheel. Now that we have the wheel off of there, let's move along to removing our front strut. To do that, you're going to want to come along the back side, follow your flex hose and your ABS wire, and you're going to find one 14mm mounting bolt. Remove that bolt. Inspect your hardware as you remove it. Now we're going to reach along the back here and we're going to start separating the flex hose and the ABS wire from the backside of the strut. Make sure you've got plenty of slack from both of these. It's extremely important. Now let's move along the backside of the strut. Along the backside here, we're looking for this plastic clip that holds the ABS wire to the strut. Carefully get underneath this area using a small screwdriver or a pick and separate it. Once you have it separated, grab that ABS wire and remove it from the area. Once again, we're trying to make sure we have plenty of slack from the ABS wire and the flex hose. The next thing we're going to do is move down to the axle nut here. Looking at it, you can tell that it's a 12 point, and you want to make sure you use a 12-point 30mm socket. Now let's use a hammer and punch, give this a loving bonk to break it free. Now let's continue on to the strut mounting bolts. These are the bolts that hold the knuckle to the strut. We'll remove these using a 19mm wrench and socket. Now what I'm going to do is carefully start pressing those bolts out. You might have to grab onto the rotor and give it a little wiggle. Now let's continue on to this area right here. I'm going to use a trim tool and carefully remove it from my original strut. Give that a quick inspection, set it aside because you will be reusing it. The next thing we'll do is take some sort of rag or a pad of some sort. We're going to carefully slide this in between the strut and the CV boot right here, essentially so we can protect the boot from any damage. Once you have that in there, continue on by grabbing onto the rotor and the strut. We're going to carefully separate this, bringing it down. But pay attention to your axle. As we bring it down, you also want to be pushing the axle through the wheel bearing so you don't damage your axle. Now that we have that a little lower, we can leave it hanging and let's make our way up and into the engine compartment. Now up inside the engine compartment, what you're going to notice is that the area where the strut comes through the top is going to be covered by your cowl that comes across this area. We're going to have to remove this entire plastic area. So with that said, to get this off, you need to start by removing each of your wiper arms. Now I'm going to show you how to remove this one over here because it still has the black cap on it. On the other side, ours is missing. Essentially, you just want to get underneath that cap and pop it off of there. Give it a quick inspection, set it aside because you will be reusing it. Now let's make our way right here to our 12mm nut. Remove it. Now we're going to carefully grab onto the arm itself. As we grab onto it, we're going to start trying to lift it and wiggle it. We essentially need to get this arm off of the shaft that comes through the wiper regulator assembly. When you're doing this, be extremely careful for any pinch points so you don't get hurt. Go ahead and remove that, set it aside on the corresponding side of the vehicle so you remember exactly where it goes when you go to reinstall it. Now let's do the same to the other side. Now let's start removing the top of the plastic cowl. Pay attention all the way around the top of it. We're going to be looking for a whole bunch of push clips that make their way around. Remove each of them. Now that I have all my push tabs out, I'll carefully grab onto the plastic and start lifting it up and away from the vehicle. As you do this, be extremely careful for your windshield so you don't break it. Now with the top cowl out of the way, let's continue on to removing the wiper regulator assembly. For this, you want to start by removing the electrical wiring leading to the motor. Along the bottom area where my index finger is, there's a squeeze tab. Squeeze the tab and carefully remove the wiring from the motor. Every time you disconnect an electrical connector, take a peek. If you see any funny colors, that would be corrosion and it would need to be dealt with. Now let's follow the wires down to their mounting area. Continue on with your trim tool to separate it. Let's make our way underneath this area. You're going to find that you have a rubber boot. Go ahead and squeeze that boot, give it a little wiggle, and then carefully start pulling the wiring out and through the hole. Now we can move along to our 3 10mm headed mounting bolts. You'll find one on the driver's side, in the center, then all the way over towards the passenger side. Once you have them all out of there, continue on by removing the regulator. We're going to continue by removing the rest of this metallic aspect of the cowl. You're going to find 8 10mm headed bolts. Let's start over on the driver's side and make our way all the way over to the passenger side. That one broke. Once you have all those out of there, Continue on along the front area of the cowl. You're going to find that you have this bracket that holds the hose in place. Carefully remove the hose from the bracket. Now let's grab onto this, give it a little wiggle, and separate it from the vehicle. As you do, be extremely careful not to damage your paint. Now the next thing you're going to want to do is get ready to remove each of your 3 12mm headed nuts that hold the strut to the body of the vehicle. Something to pay attention to is these 3 nuts are the last thing holding the strut in the vehicle. So you want to make sure you're reaching inside the wheel well with your other hand and hold up that strut so you do not damage your axle in any way. I'll get out the first 2 here. I'll loosen the first one, leave it on a couple threads, and then I'll fully remove the other 2. Let's hold that strut and fully remove our last nut. We'll press down on the flex hose, making sure that we're not damaging that or the axle. There it is, friends. Now with the strut out of there, let's make our way back up to the engine compartment. We want to find the strut tower. Along the top of the strut tower, you're going to find a mounting plate. For the mounting plate, go ahead and wipe it down. Give it a thorough inspection. Make sure it's not rotted or damaged or weak in any way. This plate looks perfect. It's got a little bit of rust. We're not worried about that. We'll set it aside. Now, have a look at the strut tower itself. Make sure there isn't any rust or debris in this area. We'll wipe this down, make sure it's as clean as possible, put the plate back in its original position, and then we'll continue with our installation. On there, make sure you put it in the proper orientation. One side of the plate is completely flat. That's the top. The bottom has these ridges that protrude down. All right, we're at the point that we're going to put in the brand new strut. While we do this, be extremely careful for your axle boot and of course your ABS wire and flex hose. We'll carefully start putting this in position. Now I'm going to line up my strut cap with the mounting holes along the top. Reaching through the center, I can spin it as needed and line up all 3 of my mounting studs. Now let's start on all 3 of the mounting nuts. We'll bottom them out and we'll wait on torquing them till we get everything back together and the wheel back on the ground. Now that I have them all started, I'll use my 13mm socket to snug each of them. Once they're snug, pause on this, make your way back into the wheel well. Now let's remove the protection from in between our CV boot and from the strut. Continue on to your 2 mounting bolts that hold the strut to the knuckle. Clean the threads, apply some red thread locker. Now let's carefully put the knuckle into the strut. While we're doing this, be extremely careful for your ABS wire and flex hose. The next thing we're going to do is start lining up the mounting bolt holes. We're going to put the mounting bolts through from the rear to the front. Sometimes you need to adjust the suspension by either raising or lowering the control arm as needed. Start on both of your mounting nuts. Once you have them both started, bottom them out and then torque each of these to 97 foot-pounds. Now we're going to move along to this area along the back of the strut. Take the flex hose and pull it up towards the strut. Next, we're going to grab onto the ABS wire. Looking at the bracket, along the top you have a hook, and along the bottom you have a lower little piton. That lines up with this slot right here, and then you just roll it into the proper position. As you can tell, the bolt hole lines up perfectly. Now you can take your flex hose, slide it down into the upper slot, and line up that bolt hole as well. Once all 3 bolt holes are lined up, continue on with your mounting bolt. For this, you never want to use thread locker, but you can use a little bit of copper never seize. Snug it up. Give it a wiggle to make sure it's completely secure. Let's take this and we'll slide it right into the brand new strut. Once you have it in as far as it can go, go ahead and reattach your ABS wire. Squeeze that in, listen for a click, make sure it's secure. The next thing we're going to do is continue on by putting on our axle nut. As we put it on, you want to make sure you turn it on by hand as far as you can, bottom it out, and then we're going to torque it to manufacturer's specification. Now the next thing you want to do is carefully get the wheel closer to the ground. You'll notice I put a pry bar going across my lug studs diagonally all the way to the ground. The reason for that is because I need to prevent this whole thing from spinning while I torque my axle nut. With that said, we're going to torque the axle nut to 159 foot-pounds. Now that we have the axle nut torqued, the next thing you want to do is pay attention to the slot on the axle itself. The reason that the axle has a slot is so you can take a hammer and punch and drive the nut down into that slot. That's going to hold it in the fully locked position, so it does not loosen while you're driving down the road. Go ahead and remove that safety lug nut. Now we can reinstall the wheel. Once it's up on there, start on all 4 of your lug nuts. Bottom them out. Get the wheel back on the ground. Once you have it down there, we'll torque each of these lug nuts to 76 foot-pounds. Now with the wheel safely back down on the ground, we can continue torquing each of these lug nuts to 76 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. If you have a hubcap, put that on now. The area that you want to pay attention to is the slot that's for the valve stem. That's what your valve stem looks like. Go ahead and line it up, knock it into position. Make sure it's completely secured so it does not fall off while you're driving down the road. Now with the full weight of the vehicle back on the ground, let's continue torquing each of our mounting nuts to 29 foot-pounds. All right, so at this point, we've got one side of the strut in. Before you continue on by putting all the rest of this back together inside the engine compartment, do the exact same thing for the other strut. Once you have that fully installed and torqued, we can continue up along the top. Let's get this piece back in here. At this point, you want to make sure all of your bolt holes line up, making their way across. Start in each of the mounting bolts before you tighten any of them. There should be one there. Should be one here. All right, they're all started. Snug them up. Now let's make our way down here to the hose. We'll put it directly into its corresponding bracket. Make sure that's secure. Continue on with your wiring. We'll slide it through the hole, bring it right on up. The next thing you want to do is put in your rubber grommet to help protect any moisture from in this area, making its way down to the engine compartment. Just press this all the way through. And then if you were to look at this, you can see that it has a ridge making its way all the way around. That's where the metal aspect needs to sit, right in that groove. We can take our wiring. We have our one mounting point. It slides into this hole right here. Now let's install our wiper arm regulator. We'll take this and put it in position. After we have it in there, continue on by starting in all of your mounting bolts before you tighten any of them. Time to reconnect your electrical connector. Put it in position, slide it in, listen for a click. Give it a tug, make sure it's completely secure. Now we can put on our plastic trim piece. I want you to look up along this area here. You're going to find that you have a whole bunch of hooks that make their way across. Each one of those hooks needs to make its way carefully underneath the windshield. Keep in mind, the windshield's made of glass, and we want to be very careful with it. You don't want to break it. Let's insert the driver's side panel first. Once you have it in there, continue on doing the exact same thing on the passenger side. You've got your hooks, slide them under the windshield. All right, now it's time to put on our wiper arms. When you're installing these, it's important to remember which one went where. You don't want to put the passenger side on the driver's side. Now, once I have it placed on here loosely, I'm going to carefully bring the wiper blade down to the windshield and put it in the proper position. As you can tell, if I was to tighten this right here, it's a little too high. I don't want that. I don't want it in my field of view. It needs to be approximately where it was when I had originally removed it. Once you have it in the proper position, continue on with your mounting nut. We'll start this right on here. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing to the other side. After that, I'll tighten both of the mounting nuts. If you have both of the mounting nuts tight, continue on by putting on your protective covers. Okay friends, I showed you how to do one strut. While we were doing it, I mentioned it's a good idea to make sure you do the other side at the exact same time. I assume you've done it at this point. The next thing you're going to want to do is get yourself safely down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.